You don't know what a delightful dilemma it was, trying to decide on the most appropriate method for your demise. I had so many ingenious ideas, I didn't know which to choose. So I decided to use them all. Marvelous, isn't it? But here, let me show you how it works. Picture this. The metal ball is released, rolling along its merry way until snap, boom, twang, thunk, splat. Despicable. Yes.
All right, hey guys, welcome back. This is Malferon again. You know, you're a local Sapphire Steel lover. We're all here for these color combos. You know how it is. And I'm so excited to talk about one of my favorite decks that has kind of been around since Fabled, at least in its current iteration. This is Rat Behavior. So this was a name that was actually honestly coined by one of my buddies. His name is Sevi in the Sapphire Steel community. And, you know, he kind of had a Ratigan list and named it Rat Behavior. And so, yeah, I thought that name was so good, I stole it. And I've probably played with the list a little bit more than he has at this point, fine-tuned it to where it is now today. But, you know, I just got to give him props for that. So, as with all my videos, we're going to start with the outline here. We're going to go through an introduction of what to expect in regards to why pick a deck like this, Sapphire Steel in general, but also like this flavor of Sapphire Steel. You know, as usual, we'll go through some of the feature cards, talk about them, their place in the deck. We'll go over the deck list itself, tech slots, Mulligan Strategies, what matchups might look like. We'll go through a series of play lines and specifically into Blurple, and then we'll end with some conclusions. So, without further ado, let's dive into the video. Now, what is Rat Behavior, right? Rat Behavior is a deck that is centered around the power of Ward, right? So, you know, there's another really big Sapphire Steel deck known as the Kiwi Birds deck that similarly took the power of Ward and use it to win very aggressively, very fast, right? And so it's a questing deck that achieves to get to 20 lore as quick as possible, and Ward is a core strategy of that. And so here, it's kind of, you know, we're going on the opposite end. We're doing a ramp strategy. Again, ramping means you're trying to ink very fast to get to the end game of your, you know, of your characters. But you're using Ward as a kind of a disruption ability to get there and really upset other opponents, your opponent's plays before they can really impact you, which then allows you the time to kind of start swinging back at them really powerfully. So what is Ward? So Ward is a keyword in Disney Lorcana that states that opponents can only choose characters can only choose this character to be challenged, right? So, you know, what that really means is that this character cannot be selected by your opponent for anything other than to attack it, right? And so they can't pick it for songs, they can't pick it for actions, they can't pick it for character abilities, right? And so this is a very, very powerful ability the more you think about how so many decks get over threats, right? Whether they sing them away or play a character that like removes a character or something like that. These are all things that Ward prevents, right? And so the power of Ward is that it can completely shut off so many different strategies or completely turn off certain decks, like, you know, singular abilities to get over certain points in their like curve, right? To kind of like reach their points of the game where they're strong, right? The other power of Ward is that it really puts like you as the player with the Ward kind of in the driver's seat, because you kind of now dictate when certain things will happen because you've eliminated choice from your opponent, right? And so that's why the next key thing here is that it eliminates choice. And so, you know, now they have to they either have dead cards in their hand because they can't do anything with them. They're forced to ink some certain cards, or they have to wait for you to do something first, right? Because if your characters aren't sideways, aren't exerted, and they have Ward, there's really not much a lot of decks can really do about that. There are certain ways to get around them, certain cards that get around them, but they're very uncommon. The other core element of rat behavior is that it has very, very powerful removal, especially removal that's character-based, right? And so it's going to be utilizing your classic Sapphire Steel big bodies, your bombs, right? Like Hades, Infernal Schemer, like Vincenzo, Demolitions Expert, things like that. And so we'll talk about these more in the future cards. Large lore threats. So, rat behavior can close a game surprisingly fast, with, Ratigan Greedy Genius being the big premier card of the deck, where he quests for 4 on an 8 cost body, and he has 6/7 with ward, right? And so, he has to be answered very, very fast, but getting rid of him is extremely difficult, right? And so not only are you deploying like big threats that remove things, but also big threats that can close the game very fast. And it's, if you've seen a lot of my lists, my lists love to have a lot of spice and a lot of like alternative strategies and variable plays. But this list is a very focused list. So this is probably one of the most consistent lists that I have, where it's really designed like you get to your big bombs, you keep playing your big bombs, and you play warded characters that just make everyone mad. So a little bit of historical context, like why ward, right? And so ward has actually been like a core element to who Sapphire Steel is for a long time. Probably the most famous warded character that dominated a lot of the meta, especially when you would see a Sapphire Steel deck, is Cogsworth Grandfather Clock. So this was a card that was released in set 2, Rise of the Floodborn, and frankly, it's probably one of the most powerful cards that has been released in the game, right? And so, I long for the days. I long for the days of Cogsworth, and if he ever came back, he would immediately go into the large majority of Sapphire Steel lists. One, he's inkable, which is phenomenal. He costs for 2. 5 costs. He's a Floodborn, which isn't super relevant because none of his shift targets are very valuable. But he himself has ward, and he has this incredible ability where he gives all other characters on your side of the field resist 1. Which is so powerful. And he doesn't give him to himself, but so a lot of people would basically just keep him as this pillar of endurance, right? They would just keep him readied on their side of the board. And now, like, your characters are so beefy, so strong, and so disruptive, right, that it completely changes the challenge math on how to get rid of characters on your side of the field. Let alone if you had more than 1 Cogsworth, right? It would shut off a lot of steel removal, which is very damage dealt based. And so ever since then, right, ward has been a key central strategy that Sapphire, namely, has been able to deploy, and Sapphire Steel has always taken advantage of. Back in set 1, Aurora, Dream Guardian was another key element to that, where she gives ward to everyone else but herself. So, ward has a really powerful ability of disrupting curves. In set 10, we got introduced to Scuttle Birdbrain, who is just an extremely well-statted vanilla character, right? He's a 5/5 quest for 2 with ward, right? So he's just this massive battering ram that, for many, many decks, kind of almost require 2 cards to get rid of him. So if he's questing, they have to sometimes throw 2 bodies, maybe even 3 to get rid of him. He's very costly to get rid of because of that, but then also he can function as this very safe challenge character if you don't want to quest with him and you need to fight things on the board, and there's not easy ways to get rid of him, right? You have to just deal with him. So because of that, right, ward is a great opportunity and ability to disrupt curves, and Scuttle does a really good job of doing that. He also takes advantage of the stat power creep that got introduced in set 10, where he's just a better statted character than many ward characters historically, where ward used to take up a lot of their stat line. The other tricky thing, why ward, is that it kind of, right, forces bigger, stronger responses, and it may like force like decisions like board wipes to happen in very inconvenient opportunities, right? Like I've very much had a situation where I would put a Scuttle down, and I'm at like 10 or 12 lore, and the Scuttle was enough for my opponent to just play Raging Storm, right? They would burn 1 card that can wipe out multiple cards all at once just for 1 character, because it's so hard otherwise to get rid of this character. Now, on the other side, board wipes like Raging Storm have been reintroduced into the game in a larger abundance, right? So green has access to Prince Philip and Under the Sea, and yellow has access to Raging Storm. And so, these are things that very, very well do get around ward, so you do have to keep them in mind whenever you are like deploying this deck, right? So ward, these have always been good answers to big bodies like the big bombs and a deck like rat behavior in general, but this is something that ward does not protect you from, so has always been a relatively decent counter. Now, the other cool thing about warded characters, and with Sapphire Steel, we love our songs, is that they're essentially guaranteed singers, right? Which is another huge advantage to Ward. And so you can lay down a warded character and feel, for the most part, pretty safe that they will continue to survive into the next turn or even turns after that to safely sing and then, like, you know, use your songs to disrupt whatever. So what are some feature cards in the list, right? So, you know, a lot of these are going to look pretty familiar, right? The early game for a lot of Sapphire Steel decks, especially ramp decks, are pretty similar. And so here I've decided to use the 1-drop Mulan as opposed to Develop Your Brains or Hooks. Part of this is because we are going to be utilizing the Bell, right? So 4-drop Bell, Bell Snowfield Strategist, who was introduced in set 11. There's a couple of reasons for this. One, she adds a lot of valuable early lore pressure that forces responses from your opponent while also ramping you if they feel the need to respond. The nature of rat behavior is that it is a little slower than many Sapphire Steel builds, and it's because I've elected to not put Cinderella Dream Come True in the deck, right? So that was a voluntary decision. I recognize that Cinderella is a phenomenal card, and in fact, I still consider her having a place in a deck like this. Like, you know, you could easily slot her in and she would feel good, feel valuable. But the deck really does have a pretty limited amount of princesses, so, you know, you wouldn't really be capitalizing on her triggers. And then the other thing is that the deck does not, this specific deck does not tolerate inconvenient uninkables like a Cinderella that show up in the hand in the wrong moments, right? So you're kind of sacrificing that, like, really powerful, consistent 2-4-6 line for a relatively more stable but a little bit slower 4-5-7 or a clunkier 2-4-6 with Bell. But Bill still allows an opportunity to go 2-4-6. So if they if your opponent quests early and you are about to drop Bell, and, you know, you can then swing your Mulan or Tipo into your opponent's boards with Bell on the board, they will turn into ink while also hopefully taking out some opponent's questers. She also allows for a surprising amount of lore, because if you play Bell and then just have a Tipo and Mulan on the board while you've ramped up to Bell, you can just start questing, and it catches a lot of people off guard. They don't really know how to, you know, now it feels really bad banishing your Mulan and Tipo because they give you ink. And so she generates a lot of resources kind of out of nowhere, which is pretty cool. And again, her ability is that whenever one of your characters is banished, you could put that card in your inkwell, right? So very, very powerful. The other thing the other major ramp cards, of course, we have our standard. We have Tipo and Sail, which we play on turn 2 to kind of boost up to a 4-cost character next turn. We are using Jiminy Cricket. Jiminy's functions is a couple things. He is a backup slow ramp card if you miss your turn 2 ramp, like Tipo or Sail, right? So you're not just dead in the water for 3 turns. And Mulan helps filter and look for those options as well. And again, the reason I picked, so the list originally used Captain Hook for the 1-drop. I'm kind of jumping around, my bad. I favored going to Mulan instead. One, because I really don't mind if she gets banished in a challenge. And in fact, with Belle, I kind of favor that. But 2, she feels better when you quest with her, because running into her, a lot of characters have 2 willpower and they will die in the trade, whereas running into Hook, that's not the same thing. And then 2, you know, she does filter to look for better options if you find her in the late game, right? So those are kind of the big reasons for picking Mulan. For back to Jiminy Cricket. So Jiminy Cricket actually more importantly functions as a late game consistent ink engine, because you can pay to boost and then you can put a card in your inkwell, any card, inkable or uninkable, into your inkwell, right? And this keeps Radigan Greedy Genius alive, as we're going to find out later, because he gets banished at the end of the turn if you have not inked during that turn. The main ramp engine in the deck does revolve around Kita, where you can exert her and look at the top 2 cards of your deck. You put one into your inkwell face down, the other stays on the top. So she kind of like sets up your future draw, right? Which is really, really actually pretty powerful. She is warded, right? So they have to just like deal with her in a challenge. So many times she takes a character with her in order for them to get rid of her, because they can't really just leave her go unchecked. And then 2, she keeps a Radigan alive endlessly, right? Because of the constant ink access, right? And so she is part of a powerful, the ramp line that we're going to be aiming for, which is the 4-5-7, where we would play Kita, ink, ideally, in a perfect world, play Lady Cluck, right? Who's also a warded character, exerted bodyguard, protects Arkita, who they can then keep getting us free ink, setting up the perfect next draw. And there's no real easy way to deal with this. They have to get over this Cluck, but getting over a 7 willpower body for the large majority of meta decks is extremely hard on the curve where Lady Cluck comes out, especially for purple decks where a lot of them have like very bad challenge power and they kind of really rely on like moving damage around or songs or whatever. So Lady Cluck Kita is probably your most powerful opener. There's a couple other cards that we have in here. So we talked about Scuttle, who's just a really strong, well-statted, warded body. And then we have Moana, who Moana serves as a couple things. One, she can generate value from inking from your discard. That functions as a really great mid to late game value engine. But two, it also allows you to keep a Ratigan alive if you're kind of in a late game top deck situation, but you have a Moana, you can just keep inking from your discard and let Ratigan quest. Of course, we have our standard characters like Tinkerbell, right, who's just one of the best 6-drops in the game, splashes 1 damage to all characters on play, and then, fights for the board really well because when she banishes a character, you deal 2 damage to another character. You have Goliath, one of your main draw engines. At the end of your turn, you have to end your turn with 2 cards. So if you empty your hand, right, or go, if you have 0 or 1 card in hand, you draw at the end of your turn. And then, now it does the same for your opponent, so you just have to remember that. And then, of course, our really good removal songs that we'll play in the mid-game, right? Like Bolt does 4 damage to a character, and Let It Go, which puts a character into the inkwell. Our late game is some of the best in Sapphire Steel Bomb Industries, right? And so we have Vincenzo Santorini, who on play does 3 damage, and he quests for 3, and he's inkable, which is awesome. Hades on play, you pick a opposing character, you just put him in the inkwell, right? Very good, very powerful. Arthur, who on play, you give one of any character, Challenger 2, Resist 2, and the ability to challenge readied characters. So ironically, Arthur is one of the few ways that any deck can deal with a readied, warded character, right? And so, because you can hit them while readied. So actually functions as a really good counter ward character, but also allows characters like your Lady Cluck, who only has 2 strength, to then swing for 4 and take out a lot of like really valuable readied bodies. Especially if they're, readied and, not wanting to, thought they were safe. And then, of course, one of the stars of the show, Ratigan, Greedy Genius, who is warded, right? Quests for 4 and is 6/7. But of course, his price is that if you have not inked that turn, you have to banish this character, which makes him a really bad top deck. If he's like your only card in hand, if you have no other way to get ink. But again, if you have cards like Jiminy Cricket and Moana who can get you ink from the discard, that's other ways to keep him alive and relevant. And then Beyond the Horizon, which is our big 7-cost song that you can choose either you, your opponent, or both of you to discard your hand and then draw 3 cards. So another draw engine, but also a disruption tool because you have so many warded bodies that it's actually really easy to set up a timely Beyond the Horizon whenever you want because there's not an easy way for them to get rid of your singers. So let's talk about the deck list, right? Here's our deck list. And when we talk about like our 1-drops, right? So we have minimized 1-drops. We've kept it at 4. Some ramp lists will run like 6, right? But 4 is kind of that nice toasty number where you want it to be consistent, but you really don't want to see too many later in the game when you don't want them. And Mulan's probably one of the better 1-drops to see later in the game because you can use her to draw and filter to find other answers you're actually looking for. Now, the cool thing about having the 4 1-drops is that, you want to see them early to set up for your bell, right? And so we're only running 2 bell right now as a secondary follow-up ramp engine, but Mulan having it at 4 guarantees that like if we see Bell, we probably have also seen Mulan to set up for Bell to then fight for the board and then ink you and continue to ramp up to your big bodies. So Jiminy, as we kind of talked about, helps to keep Ratigan alive later in the game. You only really ever would play him on curve, right? Kind of like 1, 2, 3. If you had a pretty bad hand, right? And you missed your turn 2 ramp and you haven't gotten to the actual line you want to do, right? Which is like jump into Kita and then play a Cluck or something, or jump into Bell and then maybe jump to a Tinkerbell after that. So really, he's meant to be a mid to late game character to keep Ratigan alive. He's pretty well statted. He's 3/4, right? And so your 4 drops. So Kita and Bell function as your natural turn 3 plays after you've done a turn 2 ramp, and they're your follow up ramp lines. Kita's your usual preferred, but Bell is definitely a good card too. As we already talked about, Bell permits a 2/4/6 line, even if it's a little clunky because you have to burn your characters or hope they get challenged after the Bell is played. Our 5 drops, we have Lady Cluck for the Warded Bodyguard, right? So she's a very powerful high roll with Kita, and she's just very strong and disruptive regardless. Like at almost any point she comes down, your opponent's not going to be happy to see her. You have Moana, who again can keep a Ratigan alive by allowing you to ink from the discard. She's well statted at 4/4, quest for 2. And then you have Scuttle, who's just a very powerful 5/5 warded body that quests. Our bomb line, right? So we're running ratios of 4 Vincenzo, 4 Hades, 2 Arthurs. The 2 Arthurs is a little spicy, right? But I've found that this makes it to where you find your massive bodies pretty consistently because they are your end game. And, once you start playing one, the string of them keeps coming, right? And so if they are not able to keep up with your big bodies, your bombs just kind of overwhelm most decks. And then of course we have our songs. The songs play a really important role in a deck like this. You are refilling with Goliath, you're refilling with Beyond the Horizons, and this allows your warded bodies that maybe only quest for 1, like Kita and Cluck, to really do some serious damage while having no real way to get rid of your singers beforehand. So what are some tech slots, right? What can we think about, if you wanted to swap out some things? Now, the obvious swap out for Mulan is Captain Hook. He does a better job of dealing with certain aggro decks, particularly dogs, yellow-green, right? He can get rid of the 1-drop lady with 3 willpower. He can make it easier to get rid of Daisy Ducks with Tipo, right? And then he's really good against red-purple. He can take out the 2-drop Diablo. He can take out the legendary 4-drop Hercules. And so these are things that Mulan legitimately can't do. And are all reasons to highly consider him. I do think Mulan's value overall has captured my heart more than Hook, but Hook is definitely a good option. And then you could always consider in a deck like this, develop your brain, right, to have more consistency in regards to finding your turn 2 ramp. You can play this and look at the next 2 cards. You take one and then you put the other on the bottom. Also functions as a way to set up Moana to get a card into the discard, and then a card that draws you a card as well. It's always pretty good. This is never a bad card to see later in the game, right? Because it can help you find other answers, dig 2 cards deeper. I've just found personally that Mulan does a reasonable enough job of kind of filtering your early hand to hopefully find that turn 2 ramp. But then also, that body is actually pretty important for Bell as an alternative line. So, having Bell in the list did sort of push me over the edge to keeping Develop Your Brain. Now, of course, the obvious tech slot swap here is Cinderella. Cinderella is probably the best Sapphire card. It's a tie between this and Sail the Azurite Sea in the game. And so, excluding her is a decision, right? It's not like I'm not aware that this card exists or the value of this card. There's a couple of reasons. I extrapolate on this a little bit, but one, part of the goal is to keep the list at a reasonable price, right? And Cinderella alone is $35 to $40, especially right now. She's only gone as cheap as $23, but she's jumped back up because of her relevance, especially in decks like blue-green and blue-yellow, on top of the fact of her natural home in Sapphire Steel. But if you, the biggest reason that you would have Cinderella on the list is that she facilitates a really powerful line to get to a fast Tinkerbell against aggro decks. And so aggro decks that go a little too fast, too wide, is a challenge for a deck like this, right? And so Cinderella helps to curb some of that. Now, other considerations are cards like Angel, right? Which can also improve your matchup into aggro lists, right? And when they're trying to quest really fast, you can start dumping your hand and pinging them. However, and the deck like this does handle a slower curve a little bit better than many other 2/4/6 builds. However, I will say that, like, with the amount of 1-drops and earlier characters we are running anyway, and how powerful our bombs can be later on, I found that, like, cards like Angel aren't necessarily required in a deck like this, but she's never a bad inclusion. Other 5-drop slots to consider for swapping out, you can consider Pete for improved draw and consistency, and in fact, 2 to 3 Pete's were in the original build. I decided to slot in the Jiminy's and the Moanas to facilitate other options on keeping Ratigan alive and relevant. As I felt like the more I played, the draw was actually pretty reasonable in this deck. 3 Beyonds, 4 Goliaths. It doesn't feel like it's a lot, but if you are able to continue to capitalize on Akita, she's sort of pseudo draw in that she kind of sets up what your next perfect card is while ramping you. And so, it saves you from inking from the hand. And so, I felt like Pete ultimately was not needed, but there are many, many days where I think about man, what if I put him back in, Another interesting card here to consider is Daisy Deck, right? And so she gives all other, so not herself, but other Sapphire characters on your board resist 1. So she's kind of like the poor man's Cogsworth, as we mentioned earlier. And so, most of the list is blue, is Sapphire. And so, playing her after playing Kita, that Kita now is resist 1, that Belle is resist 1, that Tipo, that Lady Cluck, right? That Scuttle with resist 1 is such a nightmare. And so she's definitely powerful. Her biggest drawback is that she quests for 1, right? She's well statted. She has a great ability. She's 5'6", she's a 5, she's inkable. But questing for 1, because when you start to hit your bigger bodies, you really can't afford having that many single questers, because you do kind of need to, close the game. And then, if you wanted to get rid of items, Donald Duck is a great character for, you play a character, you pop an item, right? So him or Pluto are both reasonable. There's not as many steel characters in this list, so Pluto might be a little clunkier, so that's why I favor Donald for this tech slot option. For the 7 drops, if you really wanted to sort of, you can adjust the count of the Ratigans and the Arthurs, right? So Arthur, you can put him down to 1, you can put Ratigan at 4, you can have them both at 2, right? You can play with those numbers as much as you want. I did find that 4 Hades, 4 Vincenzos did feel really good and really valuable, but in regards to the Arthur and Ratigan counts, those are flexible. You can consider some Mufasas to kind of really triple down on your endgame bomb status, and that, a Mufasa would allow you to play multiple Ratigans, Arthurs, Vincenzos, or Hades in a single turn. I did feel like it was ultimately not necessarily needed, but I'll never say no to a good Mufasa. I do love Mufasa. He's a great card. So for those that don't know, Mufasa, when you play him, there's an 8 cost on Inkable, right? He 4/9 quest for 4, so he's a monster stat-wise. But when you play him, all your ink immediately becomes exerted, and 2 of your cards in your ink will come back to your hand. So that's actually really cool because he's effectively one of the few cards in the game. It's like him and maybe Pongo, the Azarath Sea Pongo. But he's one of the few cards that allows you to, it allows you to recur cards from the Inkwell, which is extremely rare and powerful ability. So if you have your Vincenzo get inked by an opponent's Hades, you play Mufasa, you have a chance to get him back. And then when he quests, you re-ready all your ink. So he basically gives you 2 turns, right? Which is so overwhelmingly powerful, right? Having an unanswered Mufasa almost guarantees you game. And then we have our songs. So another really powerful song to consider here is Keep the Ancient Ways, which got it released in set 11, Winterspell. When you play this card, it's 2 cost inkable. When you play this song, your opponents cannot play any actions or items until your next turn. So they are restricted to only character usage. Or abilities. Now, this is a great closing card, right? This turns off board wipes, turns off opponent items and such, and so it really just kind of buys you a whole turn to do whatever you want. So yeah, very powerful, but sometimes you just need to get rid of things, and so that's why I favored keeping Bolt and Let It Go. You could consider Strength, right? But because the deck really plays a slow drip of big abled bodies, if in most cases, it actually didn't feel very natural that you'd have the amount of characters to do the amount of damage you really wanted with Strength. Now, Strength makes a little bit more sense, or makes a lot more sense in aerial builds, where you can really stretch that Strength but with +3 damage to kind of eliminate most targets. But outside of aerial, it's a little bit harder to justify in a deck like this. So what does the mulligan kind of look like, right? So your typical mulligan for on the play is usually, pretty straightforward for many blue decks. But you want your turn 2 ramp, right? So you're kind of in this order, right? You want turn 2 ramp, you want Kita. almost always if you're on the play. You want Inkables, you want Lady Cluck, and then ideally you would have a 7-drop and some removal to kind of buy you time while you're using Kita and Lady Cluck. And the reason you want a 7-drop is because if you use Kita, her ability the turn after she's played, right, she inks something for you. You need to ink to play a 5-drop, and then the turn after that, right, she sets you up for leading into a 7-drop, right? So that's why ending with a 7-drop is pretty powerful with the Kita line. So if we had a hand like this, right, what would we keep, what would we send? And this particular hand, honestly, I'll just keep it all, right? You kind of have everything you need, right? You have your turn 2 ramp, right? In fact, we have our choice, right? We could do Sail, we could do Tipo. So that's pretty perfect, right? Because then we could, if we draw like too many unequables, we get Tipo. Or if we wanted to retain good hand size, we could Sail. We have our Mulan as an option to play her, right? You don't always have to play her on the play. You can just ink her and just keep going. And then, we have a song that we could sing when we kind of reach that point, and then we can end with Goliath at the end of it all to draw cards and recuperate. So this is a pretty perfect hand. And so, yeah, we keep this. So what about this one, right? What are we keeping? What are we sending? In general, I would probably just keep the latter two. Keep the Sail, keep this the Tipo. If you do not see like your Kita or your Bell, it's very reasonable to keep 2 ramp cards, like to Sail and Tipo, in case you have to play them back to back to jump to 5 to 6 ink to start playing your relevant characters. It's very tempting to keep Mulan here, right, to help you find that Kita or Bell. But what I've found is that, especially if you're running 3 or more Mulans, right, the 1-drops, you're just as likely at that number to draw into another Mulan. And by keeping this Mulan, you've effectively limited your ability to find those other cards because you drew into another Mulan anyway, right? So it would have been better to just send the Mulan, which then digs you 1 card deeper when you're looking in your mulligan. And so yeah, that's the kind of general concept. So what about here, right? What are we keeping? We are keeping nothing. Send it all, right? Now it's tempting here to keep the Mulan, right? Like, oh, Mulan draws and discards a card. So like, I could keep the Mulan to dig a little harder if I've not found my turn 2 ramp. Now, again, we're using the same logic here where, like, with 4 Mulans, we are very likely to draw into another, right? And so we send this one because if we draw into another, that actually digs us 1 card deeper. Whereas, by keeping one and then drawing into a second one, right, you've actually limited your draw by 1 card. Okay, so what about this hand? It's a little trickier, right? So I would actually keep 1 Kita. Now, there's a strong argument here to just send it all, right? Like, you don't have your turn 2 ramp. Like, how are you going to get through this? And this decision is way easier with a Cinderella, right? Where you almost always keep the Cinderella. Now, so in a deck like this, Kita is slow enough to where, like, keeping her doesn't always feel right. But, again, you have a lot of different lines. Like, you could, even if you miss turn 2 ramp again, you could still, like, maybe Mulan, you could Jiminy, right? Getting into the Kita. But Kita really does kind of set up the rest of the deck as far as a value engine, as far as inking and ramping. And so I'd say in general, if you find one of your 2 ramp elements, right, which is your turn 2 ramp and then your follow-up ramp, which is Kita or Snow Bell, I would usually recommend keeping at least 1 in most cases. This isn't always true, but in most cases. So what on the draw? It's effectively the same thing, right? You want to keep your turn 2 ramp. You want to keep Kita. And on the draw, because you are getting 1 more card, right, I think it's very reasonable to keep Mulan and to actually consistently play her, right, to help keep that pressure up and, fight back the board, etc. And then, I would probably choose to keep Scuttle and Songs, right? You feel a little less excited about 7-drops because you have to do a lot more work to not lose the board when you're on the draw. You'll find your 7-drops or your 8-drop bombs when you need it. They'll show up. So what about here, right? Again, pretty perfect hand. I would just keep it all, right? We have our Cluck, we have our turn 2 ramp, and we even actually have a really great follow-up line to the Cluck, right? Which we could play Vincenzo, we could sing a song, we could play Tinkerbell. The world is kind of ours. What about here, right? Yet again, we keep the Sail and the Tipo. And actually on the draw, there's most games with a hand like this, I would actually keep the Tinkerbell because we have a line to get to that Tinkerbell very quickly. Being the, we could Sail and then Tipo, right? And that if you do 2 of those cards back to back, you will end up with 5 ink at the end of that turn going into 6 ink, which allows you to play a turn 4 Tinkerbell, which is almost as fast as you can humanly get her. Because, you know, if you're on the draw and in the blind, you don't know if you're playing against an aggro deck, and Tinkerbell really is your best answer to decks like that. All right, so what are our matchups look like? So favorable matchups in general, ironically enough, Blurple, right? So I know a lot of Sapphire Steel players feel like they struggle into Blurple, and Rat Behavior is sort of designed to eat Blurple alive, right? Like it's kind of like, it's like if it was born for a purpose, it was, you know, it is to defeat Blurple. And just really blue decks in general, like the sheer amount of ward turns off things like Let It Go, like Hades, you know, like Elsa, right? You can't pick and exert one of my warded characters. You can't Cheshire Cat and move damage on my warded characters. You can't 5-drop Hades and send one of my warded characters to the bottom or draw 2 cards, right? So these are all things that it just eliminates. So a lot of the blue decks who really rely on, you know, removal cards like Hades and such, or like songs along the way while they're ramping, really kind of don't really know what to do against a deck like this. And so I'd say neutral, you know, where Sonic Boom, a list like Sonic Boom or other 2-4-6 ramp builds do really well into purple decks, because you're able to like just be more oppressive with your songs and bigger bodies faster. You know, Rat Behavior has a little bit of a harder time with them. So, you know, put them as neutral because they can really go either way. And that's because the speed of the deck is a little harder. Amber Steel, definitely, you know, if they get if they're the song variant, if they really get what they want early on, it can feel pretty hard to catch up. But at the same time, you know, if they're kind of going for a little bit of a greedier song line and you just have all your wards set up, you know, you kind of just roll them over. So it can really go either way. And then unfavorable in general, as always, like Emerald. Emerald is a really rough color for Sapphire Steel. Green-Blue continues to be one of the almost unwinnable matchups. I mean, it's very, very tough, even for a build like this, where, you know, cards like, you know, Mean, Malicious, and Scary, and then Prince Philip, who, you know, essentially wipes a board. This gets around ward, right? And so being able to consistently and easily get around ward and eliminate whole massive boards of bombs is something the deck has a hard time tolerating. Green Purple similarly has their own access to ward, utilizes Snow Fort, so they get a bunch of resist as well. And so, you know, the value of your bombs decreases, and because the deck list right now is not running item removal. So, you know, if you see Green Purple in your area, I would highly recommend item removal. And then, you know, dogs, right? So the deck does not do as well into aggro as my other Sapphire Steel lists. It's really designed to beat like kind of mid-range and control decks. And so dogs, a deck like dogs oftentimes can kind of just run away with the game because you have a hard time keeping up with that many characters going wide. So what could be an example of a playline? So we will be on the bottom, our Blurple player will be on the top. So a very, very classic typical line for Blurple would be that they play Basil on turn 1. You know, you could just ink and pass. You would play your sail, your turn 2 ramp. They'd play their sail, their turn 2 ramp. Okay. You would deploy your Kita. They would deploy Genie, oftentimes. Then the turn after, you would ramp with Kita. You would play Lady Cluck. They can play Elsa, but then what do? Right? Lady Cluck is a 2/7. Basil's still alive. He could quest, give Elsa +2, but now she's only still swinging for 4. Do they run the Genie? Right? That puts Genie in the danger zone, because now if Genie hits the Cluck, which again, Cluck and a supported Basil Elsa are still not enough to get rid of Cluck. She'd have 6 damage if he ran everything into Cluck this turn. But that would put 2 damage on each of them, right? And so, which means that a follow-up Tinkerbell would, you know, set them up to be in range for like Angel if we had run her, right? You know, if they ran into Cluck and you just played Vincenzo, those characters are just banished, right? They're just gone. And so Cluck really introduces a really hard math situation for your opponent. And the turn after, you get your ink to 7, right? You know, with Kita, it's really like you could use her to sing, you can use her to keep using her trigger to set up your perfect hand, right? There's no real wrong way to use Kita. You know, you can just quest with her. But once she gets you to that 7 ink, and then Lady Cluck really secures keeping her alive, so you can keep using her ability, which is pretty cool. So in this situation, right, we'd have Basil, they would quest Elsa, they'd at least start to put damage on Cluck, because if I don't have an answer, you know, they are able to clear her next turn, which is appropriate. But, you know, of course, you could follow this up with, you know, playing a Vincenzo, you pop the Genie, or you pop the Elsa, right? And then, you know, you can use Lady Cluck to sing Thunderbolt, which then pops the Genie for 4 damage, right? So very typical. And then the turn after that, you can play Radigan. use Vincenzo, sing a song, play Beyond, draw 3 cards, ink a card, keep Ratigan alive, and then Ratigan basically puts them on a 3-turn clock. So, conclusions, right? Rat behavior, I think it's a blast. It's very fun. It's very anti-meta. A lot of the song decks, like my own beloved Sapphire Steel Sonic Boom, Amber Steel Midrange, Blurple decks, and just blue decks in general. This deck is kind of designed to sort of do well into and dismantle, and Ward is just very strong. It's a pretty good in a best of 3 setting, right? When there's no real good counterplay to the deck other than just going faster, but this deck has a really good, ability to respond to opponents' openings, right? Like maybe you keep the Bell, maybe you keep the Kita, maybe you keep the Mulan, etc., etc. It's a pretty cost-effective deck list. I've tried to keep it, reasonably priced to the best of my ability, thus we didn't add the Cinderellas. And so hopefully it'd be easy enough for most people to pick up. And then of course the really cool unique card synergies, like cards that ink from the discard to keep a Ratigan alive, right? So I think that's just like really fun to think about and utilize. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope you had a good time. Hope you learned something. Please give the list a try. And, if you enjoyed it, if you have found success with it, let me know how you did, right? Post in the comments. If you don't mind giving the video a like, a share, toss the channel a subscribe if you really enjoyed the content. And then, as is tradition here, I hope you guys just have a good night or have a good morning wherever you are. May you be blessed. Take it easy. And I'll catch you on the next one. You know how it is. Peace.